the Mexica gather in the Altepet of Azcapotzalco. They paddle their canoes from the island of Tenochtitlan over to the west of Lake Texcoco. Hounded by Culhuacan, these Mexica are battered and in dire need of a friend. In Azcapotzalco, they think they may have found one, Tezozomoc, Tlatoani of the Altepet and the head of an extensive tributary network of patronage and power that crisscrosses the valley. Like a Mesoamerican mafia don, he has the power to make a people. The Mexica are here to be made. Their leader, a man by the name of Acamapichli, approaches Tezozomoc as the great ruler sits on his royal reed mat in his palace. Acamapichli bends on one knee, imitating the scooping and eating of dirt as a sign of humility before this king. He begs Tezozomoc to recognize him as a proper Tlatoani of the Mexica, and for Azcapotzalco to protect Tenochtitlan from Culhuacan. As is custom, he averts looking into the eyes of the king, instead staring at the ground before him. Tezozomoc considers this proposal. The Mexica's reputation as great fighters is well known in the valley. Culhuacan had grown strong with Mexica warriors, too strong for Tezozomoc's liking. He agrees to the Mexica's request and recognizes Acamapichli as Tlatoani of Tenochtitlan. In exchange, they will now serve as his warriors and fight for the glory of his Altepet. Acamapichli thanks Tezozomoc, keeping his eyes averted as he stands up and backs away toward the door, avoiding turning his back to the Tlatoani. He and his people load themselves into their canoes and paddle back to their miserable island home. The year is 1376, and Tlatoani Acamapichli and his descendants will, from this point on, lead his people forever. But the man who can make a people can unmake them too. And as the years go by and the Mexica grow stronger, they will start to resent the yoke of imperial control on their neck. And when the hand that grasps the yoke falters in a moment of royal transition, the Mexica will look to make their mark in the eternity of history. Hello and welcome to Can't Go Back, Won't Move On, a paranoid historical storytelling podcast dedicated to seeing the history of the Americas from within the visions of the people who lived it. I'm your host, Gabriel Z. Last week, we met the people who would give Mexico its name, the Mexica. Commanded by the left-handed hummingbird god Huitzilopochtli, they made the exodus down from the mythical land of Etzlan and ascended into the unforgiving world of the Central Valley in Lake Texcoco. Guided by myth and vision, they founded Tenochtitlan, a city that was not only meant to be the home of the Mexica, but the very conduit between the mortal and immortal realms. But it was not only a cosmic city, but a political one. Its foundation was a gamble by the Mexica, that they would remain here and play the game of politics and patronage well enough not only to survive, but to dominate. In the end, in order for the Mexica to survive, they would have to declare war not on the weak, but on the strong. We are at a dangerous moment in our story, exiting the threshold of myth and into the world of history. The story these people told themselves hardens into fact with each repetition. But who will decide which version gets repeated? And what incentives are there to burn away competing visions of your own people's history? We will explore the gap between history and myth in today's episode of Can't Go Back, Won't Move On, a podcast where history isn't a story repeating, but a conspiracy unfolding. Episode 1.2, Itzcoatl and the War of the Triple Alliance. Chapter 1, The Beginning of History. The Mexica were starving. In their capital Tenochtitlan, the marshy soil of the island made growing food all but impossible. The alternating dry summers and wet winters passed them by as their land mocked their efforts at farming. So the Mexica ate nopales, the prickly fruit of the cactuses, which were one of the few things that did grow. They also fished the surrounding waters for seafood while chomping on algae and lake scum to supplement their stomachs. As for the rest of what they ate, it came from what was portioned out to them by Azcapotzalco in exchange for their mercenary services. Without that exchange, it's possible that they might have starved. Even Acamapichli as Tlatoani was not immune to these hard times. The politics of starvation make for inelegant compromises and degrading history. Perhaps, even, a history that these people would seek to rewrite out of pride. But it was this lack of agricultural dependency that ended up working to the Mexica's favor. In the world of the Valley of Mexico in the 14th century, there were no standing armies and warfare was seasonal, timed to the rhythms of the growing season. Conquest could only take place when there wasn't a harvest to collect, and a poorly timed campaign meant famine. At some point, the seasons would force warriors to lay down their arms and become farmers again. The Mexica, however, were uniquely able to exploit this. The farmers of Azcapotzalco and the Altepeme they controlled provided the tribute in which the Mexica received as a reward for their fighting, and so they were free to fight beyond the typical seasons, being sent from one end of the valley to the other at the command of Azcapotzalco year-round. And so the structure of power existed for roughly the next 100 years. Azcapotzalco dominated the Central Valley of Mexico, while Tenochtitlan served as its left hand of war. It was a role the Mexica were familiar with, having served Culhuacan as mercenaries before their split. Was it not also the role they had played for Huitzilopochtli, cutting down rivals and staking claims to new land to honor their god? Perhaps the relationship between a god and his worshippers was no less utilitarian than that between Tezozomoc and Acamapichtli. As for Acamapichtli himself, he was a microcosm for bloodlines and narratives that define the Mexica. Acamapichtli's father was a Mexica warrior, and his mother a Culhuacan princess with her own lineage traceable to the long-dead Toltecs, a highly prized bloodline and that signaled nobility and continuity to the semi-mythical glory days of their long-ago kingdom, one that had once ruled the very lands the Mexica now wanted to depict themselves as the successors of. While there's certainly a dose of irony in this, it also helped to ease tensions between Culhuacan and Tenochtitlan, so long as the Culhuacan bloodline remained favored. It is a tale of ancestry that is almost too orderly, too perfect to be taken at face value. The first true Tlatoani of the Mexica needed to cement himself further to Tenochtitlan, and did so by marrying a wife from each of the Calpulli to legitimize his rule through the leading families. In marriage, he bound all of them to his Toltec ancestry, binding them together with the barbarism of the Mexica bloodline and a unique combination of two traditions. His reign was foundational to the creation of his Altepet. He led efforts to establish the chinampas, or floating gardens, around the city to give the Mexica the dignity of their own food to eat. When that proved not to be enough, he led his people into battle against the Altepet of Xochimilco on the southern part of the lake, defeating them and using their own chinampas for the glory of the Mexica city-state. The first Tlatoani also divided his city up into its 4 constituent Calpulli, one for each quadrant in the sky, a move which must have pleased Huitzilopochtli. He ordered that the cane and reed houses of the Mexica be torn down and replaced with houses of stone, a material befitting of their new sense of permanence and importance on their island city. In doing so, Acamapichtli sought to link the creation of his city to the creation of the known world, and create an unmistakable comparison for anyone who was watching. But everybody has to serve somebody, and Acamapichtli knew that the Mexica had to serve the Azcapotzalco if they were to survive. But political structures are inherently unstable. Power feeds the appetite for more power, and the question in the valley of who pays tribute to whom was never one that was fully settled. The rule of the Tlatoani was not hereditary, at least not strictly so in the way we're used to thinking of it. The role functioned more like the rule of a political party, which at least one historian has linked as a precedent for the rule of the PRI over Mexico in the 20th century. When the old ruler died, a council of electors came together to select the next Tlatoani from a list of viable candidates from important families, often but not always directly related to the previous ruler. This was important for many reasons. One, it made the Altepet dependent on the Calpulli, coordinating them together rather than having one bloodline dominating. Two, it reflected the inherent reality of polygamy. Though banned for commoners, people who were a part of the ruling class earned for themselves the right to marry multiple women. The higher your status, the more women you were allowed to marry. The same rule did not hold the other way, as even the most elite women were only afforded one husband. Men of status would choose their wives carefully, marrying women from rival or supportive Calpulli, or even an entirely separate Altepet, in an effort to leverage their wives as a new social status. The children they had would all be considered equal, no matter who their mother was, at least in the sense that the father was free to favor whichever wife he preferred, with the favored wife's children having the advantage for succeeding him. A man could even change his mind as to which wife he favored at any time, with these changes often reflecting a change in political status as to which other ruling families were likely to be favored after the passing of the current head of the family. Just like the family bonds between Huitzilopochtli and his starry brothers, the people of Anahuac were always on edge to protect their status from jealous siblings. But the politics of the valley were, as we've said, inherently unstable, subject as they were to constantly shifting alliances between the Altepeme that were as often inspired by the pettiness of family politics as they were strategic considerations. Men who did not inherit power were granted ministerial roles, ascended to the priesthood, or led rebellions. The Tatoke, or speakers, married frequently and enthusiastically, and had as many children as they could. While others may have moral objection to polygamy, it does serve its purposes. The politics of the valley were dangerous, fraught with hazards and ever-changing. The people required leadership that was the most charismatic and capable, and knew that was not necessarily to be found in the son who happened to be born first, whatever his advantages were. The reality of a wife losing favored status to a marital rival was inherently political, and the sons of the demoted wife were often known to wage factional and fratricidal wars against the sons of the ascendant wife unless heavy concessions were made or a show of force curbed their political ambitions. It was high stakes, and it was messy, and once again mirrored the struggle of Huitzilopochtli in creating the fifth son. And because these children of different wives came from different Altepeme, these wars were as much ethnic clashes as familial ones. When Akamapichli died, his son Huitzilihuit, or Hummingbird Feather, in homage to the hummingbird god, became the next Tlatoani. He would rule for a quarter century. Mexica power had grown enough that they had begun to conquer the smaller Altepeme around them, dressing themselves in powerful and fearsome pelts of animals they respected most, jaguars, eagles, and other apex predators, descending on the surrounding villages in a display of ferocity that was as much ceremonial as it was militaristic. Huitzilihuit was a master politician and understood that for all Tenochtitlan had accomplished, the heights they had built themselves up to were built on swampy ground, and it could all come crashing down with one wrong move. So he did what rulers often did to secure more stability for their status and their people. He married well. He took up numerous wives from all the surrounding Altepeme, and dozens of concubines to sire dozens more heirs and allies. One of these concubines, a slave woman, would give birth to a son named Itzcoatl, or obsidian snake. His birth was unremarkable in the moment, just another son, and this one of a slave woman with a father who had dozens of other children and political problems to attend to. But for our purposes, it's a name worth remembering. For now, though, it was the son of an Azcapotzalco princess, Chimalpopoca, or Smoking Shield, who was the favored son of the favored wife and expected to inherit the speakership. When Huitzilihuit died, the election of this son happened without incident. His rule would last 10 years, and in that time he would lead wars against many towns and subjugate them to the rule of the Mexica, all the while carefully maintaining his relationship to Azcapotzalco. It was a system that worked. Chimalpopoca had many of his own sons, as did his patron, the Tlatoani of Azcapotzalco, Tezozomoc. Rivalries and resentments were inherent in this system of many possible heirs, but winning cures all, and so long as this political alliance continued to expand successfully, the familial alliances held together as well. But this was not the Aztec Empire we would come to think of from our perspective today, but only the seed of what it would later become. That empire would sprout, as so many do, during a season of crisis. Chapter 2: The War of the Triple Alliance. It was only fitting that the creation of the Aztec Empire, or rather the motivation for the Triple Alliance which constituted it, was born from one of these clashes among extended family members that mirrored the struggle of the god they worshipped most. It all began when Tezozomoc died. He had ruled his city-state for over 50 years, long enough that he was, for most people in the valley, the only ruler that they had ever known. He had made the world in his image. His death would bring its collapse. Tezozomoc's descendants, sons and daughters alike, had been strategically married into families across the valley, including to Chimalpopoca and Tenochtitlan, and the Tlatoani of Texcoco, the brilliant and beautiful Altepet that sat on the eastern shore of the lake named after it. Texcoco was a proud city-state whose people had inhabited the area for generations. Unlike the Mexica, they had ties to the land that predated their patronage by Azcapotzalco, and began to feel that they deserved better, that they deserved to decide their own fate. The Texcoco Tlatoani signaled this by disinheriting the sons of his wife from Azcapotzalco in favor of the sons from his Mexica wife. Tezozomoc, before he died, did not take kindly to this challenge to his authority, and dispatched hundreds of warriors in canoes who sailed across the lake silently at dawn and crept up onto the shores of Texcoco before storming the city and massacring anyone they came across. The devastation was brutal, and the speaker of Texcoco immediately embarked to Azcapotzalco to speak with Lord Tezozomoc himself and beg for mercy. Tezozomoc was not in the mood for mercy, however, and killed the lord on the spot. Later annals, recorded by Texcocan historians, said that the son of the slain lord saw his father strangled before his eyes while hiding in a cave. Others said he saw it while hiding in a tree. His name was Nezahualcóyotl, or Fasting Coyote, and he would go on to become one of the most revered figures in Mexican history and myth. Sources say that Nezahualcóyotl fled for the safety of Tenochtitlan. Others claimed it was for Tlaxcala. If it is the latter which is true, it is ironic that Tlaxcala would take the risk of harboring this boy. The shelter that Tlaxcala gave would someday come back to haunt them. But the stories have always shifted, and no definitive truth can be gleaned from the annals which describe and contradict the events of this time. They read like self-edits, hagiographies written by this or that descendant, each of them attempting to codify rumor into their preferred history. But whatever the case may be with Nezahualcóyotl, Lord Tezozomoc was not long for this world either, and the aged speaker soon passed away. Big kings leave behind a big throne. The knives came out between brothers even before their father's body went cold, and a bloody civil war erupted. A son of Tezozomoc named Mashla succeeded in seizing power of the speakership of his father by killing his brothers, the presumed heirs. Though he had succeeded in seizing this throne, his actions disrupted the network of power his father had built and sustained over valley politics. And nature and politics both abhor a vacuum, and the opportunities immediately presented themselves to others. Mashla, in his insecure bid for power, had demoted a rival city, Tlacopan. He then summoned the Tlatoani of Tenochtitlan, Chimalpopoca, half Tlacopan himself, to his palace, nominally to host him in a feast to mark the new high speaker's reign. Chimalpopoca obeyed and offered his loyalty to his new lord. But Mashla was devious and violated Mesoamerican customs of hospitality by strangling his guest. The Calpoli of Tenochtitlan panicked. A new Tlatoani was elected, but died only a few weeks later. Azcapotzalco had been the guarantor of Tenochtitlan's position in the valley. The bad old days of their constant wandering and status as little more than barbarians at the margins of the lake were still held in living memory. Fear gripped the population as times became desperate. It seemed as if Huitzilopochtli might have finally abandoned them. News from Azcapotzalco reaches Tenochtitlan. Chimalpopoca has been strangled by Mashla. The Calpoli leaders of Tenochtitlan are beside themselves with grief. The heirs of Chimalpopoca, his brothers, sons, and nephews from the favored wife, squabble and are indecisive about which action to take next. Out of the political chaos steps forward a man, one of Chimalpopoca's many uncles. Already middle-aged, he has made a name for himself as a fearsome warrior and a cunning strategist, leading Mexica warriors in battles for years in service to Azcapotzalco. Though he comes from a slave wife of Huitzilihuit, he is respected by all. His name is Itzcoatl, the obsidian snake. And in these exceptional times, he is an exceptional man, ready to seize his destiny in the history of the Mexica. "O my lords," he says to the Calpoli leaders, "we have suffered a grave indignity to Mexica honor. Mashla has strangled our Tlatoani. He has desecrated the legacy of his father and disrupted the fragile bonds which bind us all together. Put your faith in me, and I will be the Mexica nation and lead it to heights unknown. No longer will we serve the masters of the valley, we will be its master ourselves." The Calpoli agree and elect him the fourth Tlatoani of Tenochtitlan. Fate has conspired to bring the son of a slave to the heights of Mexica power. What will he do with it? Like any worthwhile ruler, Itzcoatl knew that his Altepet would be powerless in the face of Mashla and Azcapotzalco without a network of alliances of their own. He needed the support of people who had their own axes to grind against the new would-be paramount ruler of the valley, and he knew just where to find them. Itzcoatl immediately sent emissaries to Texcoco to probe their interest in forming an alliance against Azcapotzalco. The massacre of Texcoco was still fresh in its people's minds, and many of the leading families saw the logic in joining with the upstart Mexica in waging a war to unseat Azcapotzalco and cut Maxtla down while they had the chance. But it also wasn't so simple. Texcoco had many sons of the slain king by his Azcapotzalco wife, and there was little appetite for a war that might bring additional slaughter to their people. And so they told the Mexica, no. But Itzcoatl was undeterred and searched for a figure who could lead Texcoco hand in hand in a war with Tenochtitlan against Azcapotzalco. He had heard of the boy Nezahualcóyotl, the half-Mexica heir who had seen his father slain by his political patron, just as Chimalpopoca had been as well. In fact, Nezahualcóyotl's mother was not only the wife of the dead Tlatoani of Texcoco, but Itzcoatl's half-sister as well. In Mesoamerican politics, everyone was related to someone, and that someone often had a way of coming back to bite you. And so Itzcoatl found Nezahualcóyotl and the Altepet of Tlaxcala and offered this. If the boy fought for his claim to rule Texcoco and joined Itzcoatl in a war against Maxtla, their combined forces might be enough to convince Tlacopan, the recently demoted sister city of Azcapotzalco, in a triple alliance of city-states whose combined power would topple their mutual enemy at a time when the old power systems were vulnerable and could no longer be taken for granted. It was a brilliant plan, playing on the old traditions of carefully balanced alliances cemented through familial ties and the waxing and waning of political cycles in the valley. The combined forces of this triple alliance, never formalized so much as simply understood, laid waste to the forces of Maxtla and Azcapotzalco. It is said that Nezahualcóyotl had his revenge when he seized Maxtla himself and sacrificed him on the altar to avenge the death of his father. The Chichimeca heritage of the Mexica served them well, centuries of warfare under the guidance of Huitzilopochtli coming to their climax, and their warriors were among the most fearsome and successful in the campaigns that followed. Nezahualcóyotl proved himself to be an able commander as well, not only assisting the Mexica in their victories over the forces of Azcapotzalco, but systematically rooting out all of his rival half-siblings, murdering any potential rival to the throne he believed was his by right. Later, as the philosopher king of his own empire, Nezahualcóyotl would reflect on the war he had waged and the emptiness it had left within him, composing a poem which read, "What does your mind seek? Where is your heart? If you give your heart to each and every thing, you lead it nowhere, you destroy your heart. Can anything be found on earth?" It seems that even in victory, the people of the sun couldn't help but wonder if there was still something being withheld from them by the gods above. For his part, Huitzilopochtli never answered Nezahualcóyotl. When the dust settled and the bodies were accounted for, Azcapotzalco had been vanquished. The alliance of the three ascendant Altepeme was victorious, and they celebrated their victory collectively. Itzcoatl formalized his speakership of Tenochtitlan while acting as the guarantor of Nezahualcóyotl's own coronation as Tlatoani of Texcoco. The Altepet of Tlacopan, as the junior partner, was satisfied that their contribution were also rewarded appropriately in the reconfigured tributary network the three agreed upon. And so it was that the Mexica had found themselves the dominant, but not sole, Altepet of the valley. Their journey from the caves of Chicomostoc had seen them wandering the American deserts for centuries, rootless barbarians relying on pillage and mercenarial recruitment to survive, only to ascend to the dizzying heights of power within the valley of central Mexico. And it had been accomplished by Tlatoani Itzcoatl, son of a slave and father of his empire. And what was this emperor's first decision? He would rewrite the history of his people. He ordered the burning of all the Mexica codices, anything that would contradict the vision he had had for his people. Any reference to the starving days of the Mexica was erased. Sources which insinuated that Itzcoatl was not as fit for the royal reed mat as his full-blooded royal brothers were incinerated. It was the first of a series of conspiracies that make the history of these people so fascinating and contorted. Later, additional codices would be commissioned by Itzcoatl and his successors. These new codices reflected the vision that Itzcoatl and his supporters saw for themselves and their people. These codices would become the basis for the oral history the Mexica would preserve through their empire and even beyond its destruction. Eventually, the sons of the sons of the sons of this generation of Mexica leaders would revisit this history, reconstructing it for the strangers who now ruled them. Knowledge of how to interpret these codices would be lost, and in the blinking moments of half-remembrance uttered aloud and inscribed on paper, the past would be in conversation with the future, each of them bound to the other, inseparable. It is the inescapable conspiracy of history which reveals to us so much of what we know of these times. And so the Mexica burned their history to make themselves immortal, but they left us staring into the ashes, unsure what was myth, what was memory, and what was murder by omission. It left the future wide open to interpretation. Next time, we will meet the man who, more than any other, defined what was remembered of Mexica history and what would be forgotten. We will meet Itzcoatl, architect of an empire and the high priest of ritual sacrifice. And so that's all for this episode of Can't Go Back, Won't Move On. Written, narrated, and produced by Gavrilo Z, with music composed and performed by Jake Krasiniak. If you like the show, tell your friends. All of my listeners are appreciated. Thank you. Goodbye.